Imagine a short man, standing just 5'6", conquering nearly all of Europe, defeating massive armies, and making powerful kings tremble at the mere mention of his name. How was this even possible? The answer will surprise you. For years, the world's top military strategists have tried to uncover the seemingly impossible secret of Napoleon Bonaparte. How did one man from a small Mediterranean island become the nightmare of Europe's greatest empires? And no, it wasn't just luck or sheer numbers. In fact, during many of his most famous battles, Napoleon was outnumbered. At Austerlitz, widely regarded as his military masterpiece, he faced a much larger army, yet managed to secure a crushing victory that forever altered the map of Europe. But here's the most intriguing part. While his enemies had larger armies, better equipment, and more resources, Napoleon had something far more valuable. A secret so powerful it turned a young Corsican officer into the greatest military genius the world has ever seen. In this video, you'll uncover the revolutionary technique Napoleon used to win battles before they even began, the fatal mistake his enemies made time and time again, costing thousands of lives, the secret strategy he used to inspire his soldiers to achieve the impossible, how he could predict his opponent's moves with uncanny accuracy. And here's the most fascinating part. These same strategies are still studied today, not just in military academies but also in the world's leading business schools. Napoleon's genius goes far beyond the battlefield. But before revealing how he became almost unbeatable, let me take you back to one pivotal night in 1796. A young general made a decision no commander had ever dared to make before, a decision that would change the art of war forever. And don't worry, you don't need to be a military history expert to understand what's coming. In fact, after this video, you'll never look at leadership, strategy, and success the same way again. So, get ready for a fascinating journey into the mind of the greatest military genius in history. Pay close attention, because what you're about to discover isn't in the textbooks. It all began when a young artillery officer decided to challenge every established rule of warfare. In 1793, while other generals clung to traditional military manuals as if they were sacred texts, the 24-year-old Napoleon was about to turn the entire concept of war upside down. At a time when armies marched in perfect formations and battles resembled choreographed chess matches, he did something unthinkable. Picture this: a young officer, freshly promoted, studying a map of the besieged city of Toulon. While seasoned generals debated a conventional frontal attack, Napoleon noticed something no one else had seen, a weak spot that could change everything. Impossible, the veteran scoffed when he presented his plan. This goes against everything we know about warfare. But Napoleon had discovered something revolutionary. War wasn't about following rules. It was about breaking them the right way. Here lies Napoleon's first secret to genius. While other generals thought in terms of how battles should be fought, he thought in terms of how the enemy least expects the battle to be fought. Take Toulon, for example. Instead of launching the predictable assault on the main fortifications, as everyone anticipated, Napoleon focused on a single target, Fort Leguillet. At first, his decision seemed reckless, even insane, but there was a brilliant method to his apparent madness. What followed was so astonishing that even his harshest critics couldn't deny they were witnessing something entirely new in the art of war. Napoleon had identified three principles no one else recognized. 1. Speed matters more than the size of the army. 2. Surprise is more powerful than brute force. 3. A soldier's morale outweighs any technological advantage. On a rainy December night, while British troops braced for the usual frontal assault, Napoleon executed an audacious move no one thought possible. His men dragged heavy cannons across terrain deemed impassable. The result? In mere hours, the impossible became reality. Fort Leguillet fell, and with it, Toulon's entire defense crumbled like a house of cards. The British, caught completely off guard, were forced into a humiliating retreat by sea. But the victory itself wasn't the most remarkable part. What truly stood out was how this battle set the standard for all of Napoleon's future campaigns. He had uncovered a fundamental truth. True military genius wasn't about having more troops or superior weapons. And this brings us to Napoleon's second devastating secret, a revolutionary technique that even his greatest admirers took years to fully grasp. It was a method he would use to conquer nearly all of Europe. But before revealing this technique, we need to understand how Napoleon turned a small victory in Toulon into a stepping stone to becoming the most feared military leader in history. While Europe was still trying to make sense of what had happened in Toulon, Napoleon was already working on something even more revolutionary. He had identified a fatal flaw in his enemies. They were predictable. In 1796, now commanding the army of Italy, Napoleon introduced a concept that shocked his adversaries: the divisional system. It sounds complex, but it's brilliantly simple. Picture a traditional army as a closed fist, strong but slow and rigid. Now imagine Napoleon's army as an open hand, with each finger moving independently. Each division of his army could march separately, attack from different directions, quickly regroup when necessary. Here's the genius part. While the Austrian and Prussian armies lumbered across the battlefield like heavy elephants, Napoleon's divisions moved like agile boxers, darting around their opponents. This gave him the ability to do something extraordinary. Take the Battle of Montenotte, for example. Napoleon made a move his enemies considered suicidal. He divided his army in front of the enemy. The Austrian generals smiled, thinking he'd made the most basic mistake in warfare. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a brilliant trap. As the Austrians concentrated their forces to crush what appeared to be a divided and vulnerable army, Napoleon executed what became known as the maneuver on the central position. His seemingly scattered divisions quickly converged, catching the Austrians completely off guard. The result? In just 10 days, Napoleon defeated 3 separate armies, took 15,000 prisoners, captured 50 cannons, forced the Kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont out of the war. But Napoleon's true brilliance wasn't just in his military strategy. He had an extraordinary gift for inspiring his men. While other generals gave orders from lavish tents, Napoleon slept among his soldiers, shared their hardships, knew his officers by name. This ability to connect with his troops turned an ordinary army into a force that would follow him anywhere, even into the most impossible battles, memorized details of their lives. And here's another devastating secret. Napoleon understood that wars are not won solely with tactics and strategies, but with the hearts of men. He famously said, "Morale is to the physical as 3 is to 1. Yet even with all these innovations, one final piece of the puzzle was missing, something so revolutionary that when finally implemented, it transformed Napoleon from a brilliant general into a living legend. This is where we dive into the most controversial and fascinating aspect of Napoleon's genius, his ability to predict and manipulate not only military movements but also entire political decisions of his enemies. Get ready, because what you're about to discover explains why, even over 200 years later, Napoleon's tactics are still studied in the world's top military academies. Here, we arrive at the most extraordinary element of Napoleon's genius, something his enemies only realized when it was far too late. While everyone thought he was just a brilliant military strategist, Bonaparte was actually playing a much larger game. In 1805, on the eve of the Battle of Austerlitz, his masterpiece, Napoleon implemented what would become known as Le Grand Système. It wasn't just a military tactic, it was a complete reinvention of the art of war. The system operated on 3 simultaneous levels. 1. Tactical level, rapid and unpredictable troop movements. 2. Strategic level, manipulation of the intelligence reaching the enemy. Psychological level, breaking the enemy's confidence before the battle even began. Let's see how this worked at Austerlitz. First, he pretended his army was weak and disorganized. Then he allowed enemy spies to discover false information. Finally, he provoked the egos of the Russian and Austrian commanders. And here's the masterstroke. Napoleon knew his enemies wouldn't resist the temptation to attack what appeared to be a vulnerable French army. As he famously said, "When your enemy is making a mistake, don't interrupt him." On the morning of December 2nd, 1805, as fog covered the battlefield, the Russo-Austrian allies fell directly into the trap. They did exactly what Napoleon had predicted 3 weeks earlier. The result was devastating. 15,000 allies killed or wounded. 11,000 captured the entire Allied army in complete disarray. The Holy Roman Empire effectively dismantled. But the most remarkable part wasn't the victory itself. It was how Napoleon made his enemies believe they were making their own decisions, when in reality, they were following a script he had written weeks earlier. Here's something fascinating. These same principles are used today in business strategy, digital marketing, international negotiations, sports competitions. Napoleon's true genius wasn't just in winning battles, but in his profound understanding of human psychology. He didn't merely command armies, he manipulated entire realities. Think about it. While his contemporaries operated with 18th century tactics, Napoleon was effectively inventing modern psychological warfare. He wasn't ahead of his time, he was creating the future. Yet with all his brilliance and impossible victories, one inevitable question remains. What ultimately defeated Napoleon? The answer might surprise you, because it wasn't an army, a battle, or even a general. It was something far deeper and more ironic, a lesson that still resonates today about power, ambition, and the limits of human genius. What truly defeated Napoleon was his own success. It sounds contradictory, doesn't it? But here's the devastating irony. The same genius that elevated him to the pinnacle blinded him to his own limits. In 1812, at the height of his power, ruling nearly all of continental Europe, Napoleon made the fatal mistake his enemies had been waiting for. He began to believe in his own invincibility. The Russian campaign would be his ultimate test. And here, for the first time, all his brilliant systems encountered something they couldn't defeat: defeat nature itself. Consider the staggering numbers. 600,000 men marched into Russia, only 100,000 reached Moscow, and just 20,000 returned alive. And here lies the deepest lesson of this story. Even the greatest genius has limits. True wisdom isn't just about knowing how to win, but knowing when to stop. Think of how many companies, leaders, and empires have fallen for the same reason. Apple without Steve Jobs in the 90s, the Roman Empire's overexpansion, major corporations collapsing due to overconfidence. What does this teach us today? Innovation is crucial but must be sustainable. Success can be the greatest enemy of success. The biggest risks come when we're at the top. Here's something fascinating. The very principles that made Napoleon great are the same ones that can help us today, as long as we also learn from his mistakes. How can we apply this to our lives? Innovate constantly but stay grounded. Analyze the environment before acting. Never underestimate external factors. Stay humble, even in success. So, tell me in the comments, where do you see these patterns repeating today? In what areas of your life can you apply these lessons? And if you found this story fascinating, wait until you learn about the next historical figure we'll analyze. A leader who conquered the largest land empire in history without even knowing how to read or write. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Remember, true genius isn't about never failing. It's about learning from every victory and every defeat. As Napoleon himself said, impossible is a word to be found only in the dictionary of fools. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the greatest strategists in history.